We are now into Day 3 of Operation Epic Fury, and the Pentagon has just delivered its first formal briefing update on the conflict, with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff making clear to the American public and to the world that this operation is not approaching its conclusion. The military objectives assigned to Central Command and the Joint Force will require additional time to achieve, and in some cases the work ahead will be demanding and difficult. The Pentagon has stated plainly that additional American losses are expected as the campaign continues, and that every effort will be made to minimize those losses as operations proceed. The flow of American forces into the region is ongoing, with Admiral Cooper receiving additional force deployments even as this briefing was delivered. The scale of what has been accomplished in the first 57 hours of the operation is significant by any historical measure. More than 1,000 targets were struck in the first 24 hours alone across every operational domain simultaneously, including land, air, sea, cyber, and space. The Space and Cyber Command elements of the Joint Force were among the first to act when the operation commenced, reflecting the integrated multi-domain nature of how modern American military power is being projected in this campaign. The force package deployed includes thousands of service members drawn from all branches of the American military, hundreds of advanced fourth and fifth generation fighter aircraft, dozens of aerial refueling tankers, the Lincoln and Ford carrier strike groups, and a comprehensive reconnaissance network providing continuous intelligence coverage across the battle space. The chairman described the operation as a demonstration of what the United States military uniquely delivers: the capacity to project power on a global scale with speed, surprise, precision, and overwhelming force at the moment and in the location the nation requires it. The breadth of the leadership elimination achieved in the operation has now been more fully documented. According to information provided through the White House, 48 senior Iranian leaders have been eliminated since the operation began. Among those killed are the head of the military bureau, the head of intelligence, the chief of staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, the IRGC commander, the head of the Security Council, the defense minister, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. Only 2 supreme leaders have existed in the entire history of the Islamic Republic since its founding following the 1979 revolution. That lineage has now been broken. Israeli officials have separately confirmed that more than 40 Iranian commanders have been killed in strikes conducted since the operation began, including top leadership figures within the Revolutionary Guard Corps. Satellite imagery obtained from northwestern Iran provides visual confirmation of the destruction of ballistic missile launch sites in that region. Before and after comparisons show launch infrastructure that was clearly visible in pre-strike imagery reduced to rubble in post-strike images, with structures that were identifiable on the ground prior to the strikes no longer present in the aftermath. The ballistic missile sites located in western Iran are of particular strategic significance, given their geographic proximity to both Israel and the Gulf states. From western Iran, the distance to Israel is approximately 800 miles, well within comfortable range of Iranian ballistic missile systems. The distance to the Gulf nations is even shorter, making those launch sites a direct and immediate threat to every country in the region hosting American military forces. The geographic layout of American military infrastructure in the region has become relevant context for understanding the current operational picture. The United States maintains a major Army base in Kuwait, a major Navy base in Bahrain, and a large and strategically important air base in Qatar, along with significant military presence in Abu Dhabi. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is positioned in the Arabian Sea, while the USS Gerald R. Ford Strike Group is operating off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean. Both carriers are nuclear-powered vessels that have been at sea for extended periods and carry the full capacity of a modern American carrier strike group. The Strait of Hormuz, through whose narrow 21-mile passage approximately 20% of the global daily oil supply travels, is a geographic focal point that will attract increasing attention as the conflict continues, with potential implications for global energy markets if the strait is threatened or disrupted. Hezbollah has now directly entered the conflict by firing rockets across the Lebanese border into northern Israel, specifically targeting the city of Haifa. Israel has responded with strikes against multiple targets in the Lebanese capital of Beirut, with Israeli officials describing the leader of Hezbollah as a legitimate target of those strikes. A resident of Beirut described experiencing 3 consecutive explosions, separated by approximately 10-minute intervals, each striking progressively closer to his location before he and his family fled. The expansion of the conflict to include Hezbollah opens a new front that adds to the simultaneous pressures Israel is managing from Iranian ballistic missile fire and from the ongoing campaign in Tehran. Iranian missiles struck the southern Israeli city of Beersheba this morning, wounding 10 people. From the vantage point of Tel Aviv, journalists have been observing Iranian missiles being intercepted overhead by Israel's multi-layered missile defense systems, with the interception activity visible in the skies above the city throughout the period of this reporting. President Trump addressed the nation regarding the American service members who have lost their lives in the operation, delivering remarks described as striking an appropriate tone that acknowledged the gravity of the human cost involved. He expressed grief on behalf of the nation for the service members he described as true American patriots who made the ultimate sacrifice, stated that the mission for which they gave their lives would continue, called for prayers for the full recovery of those wounded in action, and expressed gratitude to the families of the fallen. He acknowledged directly that additional losses are likely before the operation reaches its conclusion. The confirmed American fatality count has reached 4, a number that military analysts have contextualized within the overall scale and complexity of the operation, while emphasizing that every individual loss carries profound significance for the families involved. Military analysts reviewing the overall picture of what has been accomplished in the first 57 hours have described the operation in terms that place it among the most consequential and technically impressive American military undertakings in modern history. Looking at the groundwork that preceded this campaign, analysts have pointed to the Abraham Accords, the earlier Operation Midnight Hammer strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, and other preceding actions as having collectively laid the strategic foundation that made an operation of this scope possible. The commencement of operations in space and cyber domains before physical strikes began reflects a level of integrated multi-domain planning that represents a significant evolution in how American military power is coordinated and applied. The suggestion being offered by military observers is that earlier operations, including Midnight Hammer and others, served as preparation that refined the targeting intelligence, the operational coordination, and the force disposition necessary to execute what is now unfolding. Looking ahead at what comes next in the campaign, analysts are identifying 2 specific areas where additional ground-level activity may be required, even within an operation that has explicitly stated it will not involve a ground force occupation of Iran. The first involves the challenge of locating and destroying concealed ballistic missile silos that have not yet been neutralized from the air, a task that may require special operations forces with precise, on-the-ground intelligence to accomplish effectively. The second involves whatever transition of governance occurs within Iran as the operation continues to eliminate the existing leadership structure, a process that may require some form of American engagement or support at the ground level, even if that engagement falls well short of the kind of large-scale base presence that proved so costly in Iraq. The explicit concern being voiced by analysts who were present through the Iraq experience is that the United States must not find itself in a situation where American troops are sitting on fixed bases, exposed to improvised explosive device attacks and asymmetric threats of the kind that define the worst periods of the Iraq conflict. The prevailing assessment is that the current administration is aware of this risk and will structure any follow-on ground presence to avoid replicating those conditions. One of the most strategically significant unintended consequences of Iran's retaliatory strategy has been the transformation of the Gulf states from cautious bystanders into active participants aligned against Tehran. Prior to the Iranian strikes against civilian targets in Gulf capitals, those nations had been working to maintain a position of careful neutrality, concerned about the implications of being seen as directly supporting military action against a neighboring power with whom they share a complex history of relationships. Iran's decision to fire missiles not merely at American military installations, but at hotels, airports, and civilian areas in Gulf cities fundamentally altered that calculus. Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Oman all sustained strikes that affected civilian populations and infrastructure. The response from those governments has been a movement toward the coalition that had previously been working to avoid direct confrontation with Iran. Aircraft from Gulf nations are now flying as part of the broader defensive effort, and the question of whether American forces will be permitted to use Gulf bases for offensive strike operations, access that some of those nations had initially declined to provide, is being actively reconsidered in light of the Iranian strikes against their own civilian populations. Iran entered this confrontation with a limited set of regional partners, and its decision to strike Gulf civilians, rather than confining its retaliation to American military targets, has reduced that support further. As one analyst summarized it, Iran had very few friends before it began hitting Gulf cities. It has fewer now. The relationship between Iran and its two most significant remaining international supporters, Russia and China, introduces another dimension of concern for Tehran. Both countries have significant commercial interests tied to Iranian weapons purchases and to the drone production that Iranian forces have been deploying extensively throughout this conflict. The striking of Iranian weapons production infrastructure as part of the operation directly affects the industrial base from which Russian and Chinese commercial relationships with Iran derive value. Whether those relationships survive the scale of damage being inflicted on Iranian military and industrial infrastructure is a question that extends the conflict's implications into the broader geopolitical competition between the United States and its principal strategic rivals. Looking specifically at the naval dimension of the conflict as it develops over the coming hours and days, military analysts with direct operational experience in the region have identified the Strait of Hormuz as a focal point of concern for what Iran's remaining viable military options might look like. With its ballistic missile inventory being systematically degraded, its air defenses being suppressed, and its command and control structure having been decapitated, the tools available to Iran for continued large-scale conventional military action are narrowing. One capability that analysts regard as a continuing and serious threat is the potential deployment of underwater mines in the Strait of Hormuz. The strait at its narrowest point measures 21 miles across, and 20% of the world's daily oil supply transits through that passage. Mines placed in those waters would represent a threat not only to American naval assets, but to global commercial shipping and energy markets, extending well beyond the immediate conflict zone. Analysts have noted that American military capability in the underwater domain, including unmanned underwater systems operating in ways that parallel the drone operations more visible at the surface and in the air, is being actively employed in monitoring for precisely this threat. The concern extends in its implications all the way to the west coast of the United States, given the global shipping networks that depend on the strait remaining open to navigation. The broader picture on Day 3 of Operation Epic Fury is one of a conflict that has already surpassed in scale and consequence what any single previous American military operation in the region has produced, while simultaneously demonstrating that the full range of objectives set for the joint force will require additional days and additional effort to achieve. 48 Iranian leaders eliminated, including the supreme leader. More than 1,000 targets struck in the first 24 hours. Nuclear capability degraded. Ballistic missile program significantly disrupted. Satellite imagery confirming the physical destruction of launch infrastructure in northwestern Iran. Gulf nations that began as cautious bystanders drawn into active alignment against Tehran by Iranian strikes against their own civilian populations. Hezbollah entering the conflict from Lebanon, introducing a new front. Naval assets, including 2 carrier strike groups, maintaining continuous operational presence in the Arabian Sea and the Mediterranean. And the acknowledgement from the highest levels of American military leadership that additional losses are expected before the operation reaches the conclusion of its assigned objectives. Day 3 has confirmed both the scope of what has been accomplished and the distance that remains before the mission can be considered complete.